We call it the big one because we expect the next San Andreas earthquake to be in the upper magnitude 7s to a magnitude 8, which is a very large earthquake.
How many lives are going to be lost when we have another big earthquake? It's going to be tens of billions of dollars and hundreds, if not thousands, of lives lost.
Brace yourself, San Francisco. Within just 72 hours, 2 earthquakes measuring around magnitude 3.7 have shaken the Bay Area, making people wonder if the big one is knocking at the door. Are these recent quakes simply random rumbles beneath the surface? Or is there a hidden danger that's about to erupt in epic fashion? With talk of looming fault lines, haunting past disasters, everyone is asking the same question. Is San Francisco on the verge of a seismic showdown? In 72 hours, what really happened? Over the course of 3 days, San Francisco and areas to its east felt 2 small but attention-grabbing earthquakes, each measured around magnitude 3.7. While neither quake caused large-scale damage, both events set many Bay Area residents on edge.
A 3.7 magnitude earthquake struck San Francisco at about 7:02 this morning. And according to the United States Geological Survey, the quake was centered just about 3 miles northwest of the San Francisco Zoo.
Earthquakes of that size aren't uncommon in California, but 2 of them in such close succession immediately sparked chatter about what might be lurking underfoot. The first quake rocked the region on a Friday, reportedly centered near the Pacific Ocean just off San Francisco's western edge. People from the city's Sunset District all the way up past the Golden Gate Bridge felt a jolt. Though it was relatively shallow, about 5 miles deep, there were no reports of major damage. In fact, even the San Francisco Zoo, close to the epicenter, continued its daily routines with minimal disruption. Zoo officials confirmed that no animals or humans were harmed. Before folks had a chance to forget that initial quake, another tremor came along on Sunday morning. This time, it originated near Pleasant Hill, about 9 miles beneath the surface. Although Pleasant Hill sits a bit farther east, people in Concord, Vacaville, and Sacramento reported feeling the ground move. Once again, no significant destruction happened, but the quick repetition of quakes definitely raised eyebrows. Suddenly, local social media lit up with questions. Were these quakes connected? Should we brace for something bigger? Local seismologists assured everyone that small quakes like these are fairly normal in a region with many fault lines. Still, the 72-hour coincidence got under many people's skin, dredging up memories of bigger, much more damaging events like the 1989 Loma Prieta and the catastrophic 1906 earthquake. While smaller quakes sometimes do precede larger ones, known as foreshocks, the scientific community generally needs more data to establish any real link. The 1989 Loma Prieta disaster. When the ground shook on those recent mornings, countless residents immediately recalled the massive quake of 1989, known as the Loma Prieta earthquake. That event has become locked in local memory as a turning point in how the Bay Area thinks about safety, infrastructure, and community preparedness. On October 17, 1989, at around 5:04 p.m., people all over Northern California were settling in for Game 3 of the World Series, the Battle of the Bay, featuring the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants, when reality delivered a terrifying interruption.
Parker at second base, so the Oakland A's take. I'll tell you what, we haven't heard.
Loma Prieta registered a magnitude of 6.9, but the price of those 15 seconds of shaking was enormous. Buildings toppled, roads buckled, and entire neighborhoods felt like they were riding a wild roller coaster. The infamous imagery many people remember is the collapsed double-decker Cypress Street Viaduct in Oakland, where the upper deck fell onto the lower one, trapping vehicles in between and causing dozens of tragic fatalities.
Cypress structure has collapsed. We have a major injury accident at Cypress and West Grand.
Meanwhile, a portion of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge also failed, with a large segment of the upper deck crashing onto the lower deck. Though fewer people than usual were driving at the time, thanks to the World Series, this crisis underscored the vulnerability of even the Bay Area's mightiest structures. Another eye-opening factor was something called liquefaction. Certain neighborhoods, like San Francisco's Marina District, are built on loose, filled land. When severe shaking hits, that fill behaves more like soup than solid dirt, causing buildings to sway or collapse outright. Scenes of fractured homes and broken gas lines in the Marina District became emblematic of the quake's frightening power. In the days and weeks after Loma Prieta, first responders, volunteers, and neighbors pulled together to rescue trapped victims, put out fires, and distribute supplies.
They couldn't hide how shaken they were by it. And then you wonder, especially those who are not natives of this area and have no background in having been through earthquakes or hearing other people talk about it, they wonder what's next, if that was just the prelude to something bigger. And people were definitely very shaken.
That spirit of unity helped accelerate changes across the region, prompting stricter building codes, urgent infrastructure repairs, and widespread retrofitting of older structures to better withstand future seismic events. Freeways were redesigned, transit systems were upgraded, and many historical bridges, including the Bay Bridge, underwent massive overhauls. An earlier nightmare, the 1906 earthquake and fire. While Loma Prieta was extraordinarily damaging, the most devastating quake in San Francisco history remains the gigantic 1906 earthquake.
It was the first major earthquake in the United States to be broadcast live on TV. The Bay Area hadn't seen a seismic event like that since the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. That earlier quake, an estimated 8.3 on the Richter scale, nearly destroyed the city.
If you walk around the city today, it's almost impossible to fathom that nearly 80% of it was once in ruins. At 5:12 a.m. on April 18, 1906, a monster quake that some experts estimate to be around magnitude 7.9 rocked Northern California, leaving a lasting impact on the region's psyche and physical landscape. This quake was triggered by a huge slip along the San Andreas Fault, causing violent shaking that lasted roughly 42 seconds, an eternity in seismic terms. Buildings instantly folded, roads split open, and gas lines broke throughout the city. The quake itself was extremely destructive, but what followed caused the most destruction: uncontrollable fires that raged for 3 days. Some fires were accidentally set by firefighters who tried using dynamite to create fire breaks. In other cases, everyday activities, like cooking breakfast on a damaged stove, led to colossal blazes. One infamous instance is the ham and eggs fire, an event rumored to have demolished an entire portion of the city. Whether one's home was made of wood or brick, structural differences often didn't matter when the ground beneath basically turned to jelly in some spots. The areas built on weak fill, especially near the waterfront, similar to modern-day liquefaction zones, fared the worst. When the fires finally died down, the city had lost some 25,000 buildings across almost 500 blocks. The death toll was officially recorded as over 3,000.
It caused massive fires and killed over 3,000 people. Compared to that, 1989 was a hiccup, but a devastating one nonetheless.
But historians believe it was possibly much higher, especially in areas like Chinatown, where records were not well kept and fatalities were underreported. Refugees poured from the smoking, twisted remains into makeshift camps in parks, beaches, and across the bay in Oakland. Despite the heartbreak and chaos, San Francisco began rebuilding almost immediately. The destruction spurred improvements in building codes and planning strategies, though it would be years before the city fully regained its footing.
We think of San Francisco's housing crisis as a modern problem, but it was also happening 116 years ago. And back then, this is the solution they came up with.
Interestingly, the rebuild allowed Chinese immigrants to re-establish and even strengthen their cultural foothold in the city, culminating in the colorful, bustling Chinatown we see today. As the city grew back stronger and better, it acquired a lasting reputation for resilience. Ever since 1906, each new rattle and shake under the city has carried an echo of that traumatic event. Thanks to ongoing engineering advancements and better planning, the likelihood of the same level of devastation is lower, but it's never zero. Looking back at 1906 reminds us that the Earth can undo decades of human progress in less than a minute. What lies beneath? The San Andreas, Hayward, and other faults. If you were to zoom out and look at California's subterranean layout, you'd discover a tangled web of faults beneath the surface. These are not just random cracks, but fractures in the Earth's crust where tectonic plates grind and shift. In the Bay Area, one fault might get the biggest headlines, namely the San Andreas Fault, but it's far from the only player in this geological dance. Understanding these fault lines helps us see why two small quakes in 72 hours can trigger big concerns. The San Andreas Fault is the superstar. It runs about 750 miles from northern to southern California, dividing the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. The part of the fault near San Francisco is called the northern segment, and this is the troublemaker behind the 1906 earthquake and the 1989 Loma Prieta quake, though Loma Prieta also involved some branching faults. Because the Pacific Plate moves northwest relative to the North American Plate, tension is constantly building in the locked segments of the fault, waiting to unleash itself in a quake. To the east, another major threat rests in the Hayward Fault, which runs along the base of the East Bay Hills through heavily populated areas like Oakland, Berkeley, and Fremont. It might be overshadowed in popular culture by the San Andreas, but the Hayward Fault is equally capable of producing a nightmare scenario, especially given how many people and vital roadways are built nearby. There is evidence that the Hayward Fault has ruptured in major quakes every 150–160 years or so, with the last big one in 1868. Alarmingly, some experts believe it may be due for another major slip soon. Elsewhere in the Bay Area, the Calaveras Fault also weaves through the region in parallel with the Hayward. Add to that the Rogers Creek Fault in the North Bay, which actually connects with the Hayward underneath San Pablo Bay, creating a fault system that could produce strong earthquakes. The trouble is that these faults can influence each other. Sometimes, movement along one might stress or slightly relieve tension on another, creating complex ripple effects that are nearly impossible to fully predict. When the quakes struck recently, one near the western edge of San Francisco and the other closer to Pleasant Hill, people wondered whether the events had ties to either the San Andreas or the Hayward systems. Seismologists have said that they're likely typical releases of stress in the region, but that's little comfort to those who fear a bigger event is brewing just around the corner. Underneath the Bay Area's bustling cities, these fault lines continue their slow dance, and every so often, they remind humans that control over nature is limited at best. Elon Musk's AI predictions. San Francisco is over. No stranger to bold pronouncements, Elon Musk raised eyebrows when he declared San Francisco is over, a statement not about the city's tech industry, but rather its tectonic fate. He referenced an AI-driven model that he and some specialized seismologists have been developing, supposedly capable of predicting earthquakes with a level of detail never before seen. According to Musk, these recent 3.7 quakes could be small tremors pointing to a much bigger quake, potentially at some catastrophic magnitude in the next few decades. The words of a billionaire tech entrepreneur always make headlines, and this quake prediction story is no exception. Musk's AI model analyzes micro-movements in tectonic plates, cross-referencing them with historical earthquake data and real-time satellite measurements. The program spits out probabilities of various quake locations and magnitudes, and the numbers, Musk insists, are alarming. He has talked about the possibility of a magnitude 7.5 quake striking the Bay Area in the coming decades, with an even more shocking scenario of a magnitude 9.2 quake, centered almost directly beneath San Francisco. A magnitude 9.2 would be off-the-charts disastrous. To put that in perspective, the 1906 quake was about 7.9, and the difference in energy between 7.9 and 9.2 is massive. Musk's AI simulation even includes visual representations of large swaths of infrastructure collapsing, from water mains and underground tunnels to major sections of highways. According to this model, hillsides could collapse into neighborhoods, and liquefaction might swallow entire blocks near the waterfront. Critics say Musk is being overly dramatic, or is stoking fear to push an agenda, maybe to justify new building technologies or city infrastructure overhauls that could involve his companies. Some geologists also caution that we still don't fully understand the complexities of deep Earth physics. Predicting earthquakes to such a precise degree remains incredibly challenging. Traditional seismologists have been quoted as saying that while advanced AI models are intriguing, we're still far from guaranteeing that any system can accurately foresee a quake's exact place, magnitude, and timing. Still, the possibility that Musk's predictions aren't just hype continues to hang over the region. If nothing else, they remind us that ignoring seismic threats just because exact predictions are difficult is foolish. Earthquakes don't care if you're a skeptic or believer. They arrive when they're ready. If Musk's AI exercises end up being even partially correct, then the Bay Area may be looking at a future that demands significantly more robust building technologies, more stringent emergency preparedness, and a fresh wave of public awareness campaigns. Preparing for the big one. Can San Francisco survive? With 2 earthquakes hitting in such a short span, and with memories of 1989 and 1906 still echoing through local history, the question arises, how ready is San Francisco for a major seismic event? After a wake-up call like Loma Prieta, the city poured resources into strengthening its buildings and infrastructure. Skyscrapers were outfitted with shock absorbers, older brick buildings were retrofitted, and vital bridges received or continue to receive seismic upgrades. City officials have also introduced more comprehensive emergency plans, reassuring residents that each new mayor promises to make public safety a priority. But is it ever enough? The Bay Area's dense population and complicated geography, mountains, low-lying land, and everything in between, make preparing for the next big quake an ongoing challenge. Many neighborhoods, such as those built on artificial fill or wet soil, face a higher risk because of liquefaction. Retrofitting certain structures can be extremely expensive, and even new buildings can have vulnerabilities if the land beneath them moves in unexpected ways. First responders are more organized now than in 1906 or even 1989. The region has mutual aid agreements, meaning that fire departments, police stations, and emergency medical personnel from multiple counties will step in to help each other when disaster strikes.
The fire departments in Bay County have always worked together, but last night's Beach Council made the partnership official. The Panama City Beach Fire Rescue, the Panama City Fire Department, and Airport Fire Department approved a mutual aid agreement.
But in a large-scale quake, roads might be buckled or blocked, communications lines might be severed, and power could be out for days or weeks. Hospitals and rescue crews will be spread thin, so everyday citizens also need to learn basic first aid, locate shut-off valves for gas lines, and have an earthquake kit ready with food, water, flashlights, and other essentials. Local governments also realize that a massive quake will require more than just hardware fixes. Public education campaigns encourage residents to drop, cover, and hold on when the ground starts shaking. Schools conduct regular drills. Alert systems aim to send warnings seconds before a quake's shaking arrives. Some parts of the world, like Japan, have somewhat more advanced early warning systems that can give you a brief head start to duck under a table or power down critical machinery. Is all this enough if a magnitude 9.2 quake hits directly under the city, as Musk's AI scenario suggests? A quake that massive could overwhelm any existing preparations. Still, having no plan is far worse. The city's resilience and capacity to bounce back depends on both public and private sectors continuing to invest in safer buildings, clear evacuation routes, and robust community networks. Even if doomsday predictions don't come true, each retrofitted structure and each well-drilled rescue team can save lives during lesser but still dangerous quakes. The silent danger beneath the Pacific Northwest. Now, you may not know, but the Cascadia subduction zone is where 2 massive tectonic plates, the Juan de Fuca plate and the North American plate, collide. These plates constantly move, but instead of sliding smoothly past each other, they've locked together, creating unimaginable pressure.
Plates that make up the ocean floor are stuck, locked to the North American plate that makes up Washington. When the pressure becomes too great, those plates slip, forcing the ocean plate.
One day, all this pressure will be released in a devastating earthquake, potentially one of the largest ever recorded. This isn't just a theory. Scientists have discovered evidence of past megaquakes caused by the Cascadia fault. In 1700, the last one was so powerful it sent massive waves or tsunamis racing across the Pacific Ocean to Japan. This wasn't just any earthquake. It had a magnitude of 9.0, the kind that can destroy entire regions. But what's truly chilling is that this fault hasn't moved significantly since then. It's like a time bomb, silently building pressure each day. So what happens next? Come closer, because this is where it gets even more interesting. You may be wondering how we know about these ancient earthquakes. Scientists have become detectives, piecing together clues from the land and sea.
A new study by the University of Washington has uncovered liquids seeping from the seafloor about 50 miles off the coast of Oregon. Researchers hope this underwater spring could offer up some clues to potential earthquake hazards.
Along the coasts of Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, they've found layers of sand buried beneath the earth. These sand layers are remnants of ancient tsunamis, giant waves that swept the land after a massive earthquake. But it's not just the sand. Indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest have long told stories about the ground shaking violently and the ocean swallowing the land. These oral histories align perfectly with the scientific evidence of the 1700 earthquake. Together, science and ancient stories paint a terrifying picture of Cascadia's past and potential future. And unlike some faults that produce smaller, frequent earthquakes, Cascadia is quiet, almost too calm. This silence isn't anything good, it's alarming. It means the fault is storing more and more energy. When it finally breaks, the earthquake will shake the ground for minutes, not seconds. Think of entire cities trembling, roads cracking, and buildings collapsing. This isn't just speculation. This is what experts are preparing for. Adding to the danger is that many people in the region are unaware of the risk. While places like California are well known for earthquakes,
geologists are out with a very startling warning that Southern California is overdue for a major and possibly catastrophic earthquake.
The Pacific Northwest has a false sense of security, but history tells us that Cascadia is capable of destruction far beyond what most of us can imagine. But why hasn't the fault moved for so long? The answer is in how these plates interact. The Juan de Fuca plate slowly dives beneath the North American plate, a process called subduction. As it pushes down, it drags the edge of the North American plate with it. Over centuries, this has created immense pressure. The fault will rupture violently when that pressure finally overcomes the friction holding the plates together. Scientists have also discovered that parts of the fault experience silent slip events.
This study towards identifying the relationship and interaction between some small slips, small earthquakes, and how they may relate to some even bigger earthquakes, including quakes on the Cascadia subduction zone,
where the plates move without causing earthquakes. These slips might seem harmless, but some believe they could trigger a major quake. It's like the fault is whispering before it finally screams. But you would be shocked if we told you that the Cascadia subduction zone doesn't just threaten the Pacific Northwest. It's a global issue. Yes, we made no mistake when we said that. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake would affect millions, damaging homes, businesses, and infrastructure. The shaking alone could last up to 5 minutes, longer than most of us can imagine. But the earthquake is just the beginning. A quake this size would trigger a massive tsunami, with waves towering as high as 100 feet. These waves would crash into the coastline within 15 to 30 minutes, leaving little time to escape. Entire towns along the coast could be wiped out. The damage wouldn't stop there. Supply chains would be disrupted, power grids would fail, and recovery could take decades. But what if we tell you that the Cascadia subduction zone isn't just a threat to massive earthquakes alone? It's also the force behind some of North America's most iconic and dangerous volcanoes. Can you believe that? Let's find out more. The volcano connection. It is no news that the Pacific Northwest is home to breathtaking coastlines and towering mountains, but beneath this beauty lies a ticking time bomb. We have towering mounts across this region, like Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, and Mount Hood. But these volcanoes owe their fiery existence to the same tectonic forces that could one day unleash the big one. Undoubtedly, the Cascadia subduction zone, in a way, fuels both the quakes that shake the ground and the eruptions that fill the skies with ash and fire. These natural disasters would strike quickly and without mercy, changing the region's grounds, and risking millions of lives. One of the most dramatic examples of this connection happened in the 1980 when Mount St. Helens erupted with terrifying power. The eruption blasted off the mountain's top.
At 8:32 a.m., Mount St. Helens erupted.
They are calling it the most violent eruption of this volcano in 32,000 years,
sending ash and rock hurtling miles into the sky. The eruption wasn't just a random event, but directly tied to the subduction zone's relentless underground activity. Scientists now believe earthquakes along these faults can sometimes trigger volcanic eruptions or give them a nudge. But Mount St. Helens isn't the only threat. Nearby, Mount Rainier looms as a quiet giant. Unlike Mount St. Helens, it hasn't erupted in recent history, but experts warn it's far from dormant. As if that is not enough, Rainier's icy slopes hide another danger: lahars. This lahar is known to be a destructive volcanic mudflow created when hot volcanic material mixes with water. This water can come from melted glaciers, heavy rain, or even rivers disrupted by an eruption. The result is a fast-moving river of mud and debris that can travel 40 miles per hour. These deadly mud flows can rush down the mountain at terrifying speeds, destroying everything in their path. Scientists warn that a lahar from Rainier could bury nearby towns like Ording, Washington, under 30 feet of mud within an hour. It's not just the speed of a lahar that's deadly, it's also its weight and power. Lahars can carry boulders the size of cars and flatten forests as they roar down valleys. So if Rainier erupts, the combination of fire, ash, and mud could spell disaster for nearby towns. But have you thought of what would happen if the Cascadia finally unleashes its fury? Terrifyingly, when the Cascadia subduction zone finally ruptures, the earthquake won't just shake the ground, it will also unleash a massive tsunami. Scientists estimate a 1 in 3 chance of a magnitude 8.0 to 9.0 earthquake striking within the next 50 years. That might sound like a gamble.
It sits on unstable soil that could liquefy in a Cascadia earthquake with a magnitude 8 to 9.
But it's a scary reality for the millions living in this region. And here's how it happens. When the tectonic plates along the fault line slip, they release a burst of energy so powerful that it pushes the ocean above them, creating a series of towering waves. These waves, known as tsunamis, can travel up to 500 miles per hour. Think of a wall of water taller than a 5-story building racing toward the shore. This is the terrifying reality scientists have modeled for Cascadia. The tsunami would strike within minutes of the earthquake, leaving coastal communities with almost no time to evacuate. Cities like Seaside, Oregon, and Crescent City, California, could be wiped out instantly. The force of the water would destroy homes, sweep away cars, and uproot trees. Moreover, the tsunami would travel inland, flooding areas far from the coast and causing billions of dollars in damage. But that's not all, because while tsunamis threaten coastal towns, lahars pose a different danger for communities near the Cascade volcanoes. The scariest part of these disasters is how they are connected. A single Cascadia earthquake could trigger both a tsunami and volcanic activity, leading to lahars. For example, if the quake destabilizes the volcanic structures of Mount St. Helens or Mount Hood, it could cause an eruption. This eruption, in turn, could unleash a lahar, doubling the devastation. Coastal towns would face tsunamis, while inland communities would be at risk from mudflows. The scale of destruction would be unimaginable. So is there any form of preparation against the impending danger? Are we ready for what's about to come? How are we preparing? The good news is that scientists, governments, and communities are working hard to prepare for these threats. Early warning systems like the Shake Alert are designed to detect earthquakes seconds before the shaking starts. This system could send alerts to people's phones, giving them precious moments to take cover or evacuate.
Earthquake. Earthquake.
Oh my God, bitch. I gotta go outside.
Earthquake.
Sometimes these warnings could give people 30 seconds to several minutes to act before the worst shaking begins. It's not much time, but it's enough to save lives. For tsunamis, warning sirens have been installed along many coastlines to alert residents to reach higher ground. In some areas, Towns have built vertical evacuation structures and tall, reinforced buildings where people can climb to safety during a tsunami. Coastal schools and communities conduct regular tsunami drills to teach people how to respond quickly. These efforts are critical because every second counts in a real disaster. Scientists use GPS sensors and seismic monitors to detect ground movements near volcanoes for lahars. If a lahar starts, warning systems can alert residents in its path. Towns like Ording, Washington, have evacuation routes marked with signs directing people to higher ground. These paths are designed to quickly get people out of danger, but experts stress that early warnings are key. So while the Cascadia fault and its volcanic neighbors may seem unpredictable, scientists are working tirelessly to detect even the smallest movements deep within the Earth and giving us a fighting chance. These movements can sometimes tell that an earthquake or eruption is about to happen. For example, scientists track a phenomenon called ground deformation. This occurs when magma starts rising toward the surface, causing the ground to bulge slightly. This swelling can act as an early warning sign of volcanic activity. Similarly, small, frequent earthquakes called tremors often occur before an eruption, like a volcano's version of a heartbeat, but predicting earthquakes is much harder. Unlike volcanoes, earthquakes don't always give clear warnings. The Cascadia subduction zone is especially tricky because it's so quiet most of the time, but the scientists have identified patterns of slow movements, known as slow slip events.
Seismologists say in the next month we are due for a major event that apparently no one will feel. It's called a slow slip. And we talk with the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network about how they work.
Where the plates shift without causing large quakes. These events might be subtle clues that pressure is building. Sadly, despite all these precautions, many communities remain unprepared. In coastal towns, older buildings are not built to withstand tsunamis. Some residents may not have access to evacuation routes or may not know how to respond. Public education campaigns are trying to change this, teaching people the importance of readiness. For example, 2011, when a tsunami struck Japan after a 9.0 earthquake, many lives were saved because residents knew to head for higher ground immediately. The same level of preparedness could save thousands of lives in Cascadia. It is, however, important to note that no amount of preparation can completely eliminate the dangers of a Cascadia earthquake, tsunami, or lahar. Even with advanced technology, predicting the exact moment of the disaster remains a challenge, which is why experts have instead focused on preparation. Communities near volcanoes and along the Cascadia Fault have started building better infrastructure, creating evacuation plans, and educating the public about what to do when disaster strikes. So the steps being taken, like early warning systems, reinforced buildings, and public education, can reduce the loss of life. The region faces an enormous challenge, but with continued effort, it can better handle whatever comes next. So undoubtedly, without preparation, the consequences of a Cascadia megaquake would be unthinkable. Roads would crumble, power grids would fail, and communities could be cut off for weeks. But with the right measures, we can reduce the damage and save countless lives. The odds may seem distant, but the danger is very real. The Pacific Northwest is racing against time to prepare for the big one. The question we should all ask is, are we ready? Let's hope the answer is yes, because when the Earth shakes, every second will count, and it is no longer a question of if these disasters will happen, but when. We've come to the end of this video.